42-year-old Lauren wasn't even born in 1978, but when she discovers a letter in her deceased father's attic, addressed to her in handwriting from that year, her entire understanding of her family begins to crumble. The envelope contains words written by someone who couldn't have known she would exist, yet somehow did. What Lauren uncovers will reveal a truth spanning 4 decades, a secret so devastating it will force her to question everything she thought she knew about her parents, her identity, and the sister she never knew she had. The attic smelled like camphor and regret, the kind of smell that clings to forgotten things, waiting to be remembered or thrown away. Lauren stood at the top of the creaking wooden stairs, surveying the chaos of her father's accumulated life. Boxes stacked haphazardly, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, trunks that probably hadn't been opened since before she was born. 42 years old, and this was the first time she'd climbed these stairs. Her father had always kept the attic locked, said it was too dangerous, too unstable, filled with things that didn't matter anymore. But now Robert Mitchell was 3 weeks dead, and the attic was Lauren's responsibility, along with everything else he'd left behind. She'd driven up from Boston to the family house in rural Vermont alone. Her husband Greg had offered to come, but Lauren had declined. This felt like something she needed to do by herself, this final reckoning with a father she'd never quite understood, a man who'd been present but distant her entire life, loving in his way but always holding something back. Her mother Linda had died when Lauren was 19, taking with her whatever secrets she'd shared with Robert. And now Robert was gone too, and Lauren was left sorting through the physical evidence of 2 lives lived mostly in silence. She had a habit of humming old songs when she was anxious, usually hymns from her childhood church days, even though she hadn't been religious in 20 years. She was humming Amazing Grace now, the melody keeping her company as she pulled boxes toward the center of the attic, where a bare bulb cast harsh shadows across decades of accumulated belongings. Most of this could probably go straight to donation. Old clothes that smelled of mothballs, Christmas decorations from when she was a child, her father's Navy uniforms from Vietnam, still in their plastic garment bags. But there were treasures too. Photo albums she'd never seen, showing her parents young and apparently happy, before whatever darkness had settled over their marriage. Her mother's jewelry, carefully wrapped and labeled, and boxes upon boxes of letters. Her father had been a meticulous correspondent, keeping copies of everything he'd sent and received, organized by year and sender. Lauren was going through a box labeled 1978 when she found it. An envelope, cream-colored and brittle with age, tucked between what looked like tax documents and receipts. But this envelope was different, newer paper despite the date, and on the front, in handwriting she didn't recognize, was a name that made her breath stop. For Lauren Elizabeth Mitchell, to be opened when she's ready to know the truth. Lauren Elizabeth Mitchell, her full name, the name her parents had given her when she was born in 1982. 4 years after this letter had apparently been written, 4 years before she existed. Her hands started shaking as she turned the envelope over, studying it like it might be a joke or a mistake. But the postmark was clear. November 1978, mailed from Burlington, Vermont, and the return address was her parents' address, this house. The house she was sitting in right now. Someone had written her a letter 4 years before she was born. Someone had addressed it to her full name, sealed it, and left it in her father's attic to wait for 46 years. Until now. Until this moment, when Lauren was alone and grieving and unprepared for whatever truth this envelope contained. She sat down on an old trunk, her legs suddenly unreliable, and studied the handwriting more closely. It wasn't her father's. She knew his script well enough, the careful block letters he'd used for everything from grocery lists to birthday cards. And it wasn't her mother's either. Linda had written in flowing cursive loops and flourishes that looked almost artistic. This handwriting was different. Precise but feminine, each letter carefully formed as if the writer had taken great care with every word. Lauren should call someone. Should call Greg and tell him about this impossible artifact. Should call her father's lawyer and ask if there was some explanation. But she didn't. Something about the envelope felt intensely private, meant for her alone, when she's ready to know the truth. The truth about what? What secret had been important enough to preserve for 4 decades, sealed in an envelope addressed to a child who didn't exist yet? The attic seemed to hold its breath around her, dust motes frozen in the light from the bare bulb, the house settling with small creaks and groans. Lauren had the strange sensation of being watched, though she was completely alone. Watched by the past, maybe, by whatever truth this letter contained. She broke the seal carefully, the old glue giving way easily after so many years. Inside were 3 pages of that same careful handwriting, and something else, a photograph. Lauren pulled out the photo first and felt the world tilt sideways. The photograph showed her mother, Linda, young, maybe 25 or 26, standing in what looked like a hospital room. She was holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket, and her face showed an expression Lauren had never seen in any other photograph of her mother. Pure, devastating grief, mixed with a love so intense it hurt to look at. But it was the woman standing next to Linda who made Lauren's hands start shaking. She looked almost exactly like Lauren herself. Same dark hair, same sharp cheekbones, same wide-set eyes. Like looking at a photograph of herself at 25, except the photo was dated on the back. November 1978, 4 years before Lauren was born. This woman couldn't be her, but she looked exactly like her. Lauren set the photo down carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting she didn't recognize began to speak, and though Lauren had never heard this voice before, somehow she could hear it clearly in her head. Young, frightened, desperate. Dear Lauren, I am writing this letter to you even though you don't exist yet, even though I'll never meet you, even though by the time you read this, I'll have been dead for longer than I was alive. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was your father's first wife. I was married to Robert for 2 years before I died. And the baby in this photograph, the baby your mother is holding, she's my daughter, your sister. Her name was Emily, and she lived for 6 days before she died in your mother's arms. Lauren stopped reading, her vision blurred. She read the first paragraph again, trying to make sense of words that seemed impossible. Her father's first wife. Robert had been married before Linda, had a child before Lauren, a daughter named Emily who lived 6 days. And somehow this Sarah, this first wife who looked exactly like Lauren, had written a letter to her 4 years before she was born, 3 decades before she would read it. Lauren stood up abruptly and walked to the small attic window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, Vermont autumn painted the trees in shades of red and gold, the same colors she'd seen every fall of her childhood. The same view her father had looked at for 60 years, keeping this secret locked in his attic along with old clothes and Christmas decorations and a letter that would change everything. She forced herself to return to the trunk, to pick up the letter, to continue reading even though every instinct told her to stop, to burn the envelope, to leave this truth buried where her father had left it. Lauren's hands trembled as she continued reading Sarah's letter, each word pulling her deeper into a past she'd never known existed. I need to start at the beginning so you can understand. I met Robert in 1975, when we were both working at the hospital in Burlington. He was doing maintenance work while going to night school, and I was a nurse. We fell in love fast, got married faster. I was 23, he was 25, and we thought we had our whole lives ahead of us. We got pregnant almost immediately. Emily was born in November 1978, premature but beautiful, perfect. We thought we'd beaten the odds. Lauren looked at the photograph again, seeing it with new understanding. The baby in pink, Emily, her sister who'd lived 6 days, her mother Linda holding that dying baby, her face showing the kind of grief that never fully heals. But why was Linda there? Why was her mother in this photograph with her father's first wife and first child? Emily had a heart defect. The doctors didn't catch it at first because she seemed so healthy, but on her 3rd day of life, she went into cardiac arrest. They rushed her to surgery, did everything they could, but her heart was too weak. She lived 3 more days on machines, and during those 3 days, your mother Linda was our nurse. She was the one who held my hand while my baby died. She was the one who sang to Emily when I couldn't find my voice. She was the one who made those final days bearable. Lauren felt tears streaming down her face. Her mother had been there, had witnessed this tragedy, had been part of it. Linda had held this dying baby, had comforted this grieving mother who looked exactly like the daughter she would have 4 years later. The symmetry was almost unbearable. On the 6th day, Emily died. I was holding her when her heart stopped, and Linda was holding me. Your father was there too, and the 3 of us, we grieved together in that hospital room in a way that bound us forever. Something happens when you watch a child die. Something breaks inside you and you're never the same person afterward. Robert and we tried to go on, tried to heal, but the grief was too big. It swallowed everything else. 3 months after Emily died, I was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Stage 4. The doctors said stress could trigger dormant cancer cells. I don't know if losing Emily caused it, but the timing felt like a terrible punishment. Lauren had to stop reading. She walked to the far end of the attic, her mind reeling. Cancer. Sarah had gotten cancer 3 months after losing her baby, and somehow this was connected to Lauren's own existence, to the fact that Sarah had written her a letter 4 years before she was born. The pieces were there, but Lauren couldn't yet see how they fit together. She forced herself to continue. I had maybe 6 months to live. The cancer was everywhere. Lymph nodes, bones, organs. There was no treatment that would save me, only things that might give me a few more weeks. And I had a choice to make. I could spend those weeks fighting death, or I could spend them preparing Robert for the life he'd have after I was gone. I chose the latter. Sarah's handwriting got shakier here, as if writing these next words had cost her physically. I want you to understand something, Lauren. What I'm about to tell you, what I did, it wasn't selfless. It wasn't noble. It was desperate and possibly selfish, and I've had 40 years of being dead to think about whether I made the right choice. But I made it anyway, and you're reading this letter because of that choice. Robert loved me, loved Emily. The grief was destroying him, I could see it. He was drinking too much, not sleeping, barely functioning. And I knew that when I died, he'd fall apart completely. So I gave him a reason not to. I gave him Linda. Lauren's breath caught. Gave him Linda. Sarah had what? Set up her grieving husband with their dying daughter's nurse. It seemed impossible, grotesque even. But Sarah's next words made it somehow more complicated, more human. Linda and I became close during Emily's final days and the months of my treatment. She wasn't just our nurse, she became my friend, my confidant, the only person besides Robert who understood what we'd lost. And I saw the way she looked at Robert, not inappropriately, not while I was alive and we were married, but with a tenderness that told me she could love him if circumstances were different. And I saw the way Robert looked at her, too, with gratitude and respect, and something that could become more if I gave it permission to. Lauren felt sick. This was too much, too intimate, too painful. Her parents' love story wasn't what she'd always believed. High school sweethearts who'd found each other and built a life. It was something much darker and more complicated. A widow and the nurse who'd helped him grieve. A relationship built on the foundation of a dead wife and dead child. So I did something that sounds insane when I say it out loud. I told Robert I wanted him to marry Linda after I died. I made him promise. I said I couldn't die peacefully knowing he'd be alone, knowing he'd destroy himself with grief. I told him Linda was a good woman who could make him happy, who understood what he'd been through, who wouldn't try to erase Emily's memory, but would help him carry it. And I asked Linda too, asked her to take care of Robert after I was gone. She was horrified at first, thought I was delirious from pain medication, but I wasn't. I was completely lucid. I was a dying woman trying to arrange her husband's future happiness because I loved him too much to leave him alone with his grief. Lauren looked at the photograph again. Linda holding Emily. Linda who would marry Robert less than a year after Sarah died. Linda who would become Lauren's mother, but only because Sarah had arranged it, had orchestrated it, had given her blessing from her deathbed. They both said no at first, said it was too strange, too soon, too disrespectful to my memory. But I wore them down. I had 6 months, and I used every day to convince them that this was what I wanted. That loving each other after I was gone wouldn't be a betrayal. It would be a gift. The last gift I could give Robert, a chance at happiness. And the last gift I could give Linda, a chance to love a good man who desperately needed someone to love him back. The letter continued, Sarah describing her final months, the way she'd spent them not fighting for more time, but preparing Robert and Linda for the life they'd have together. She'd helped Linda understand Robert's moods and quirks. She'd told Robert everything he'd need to know about making Linda happy. She'd been, in her own words, the architect of my own replacement. I died in May 1979, 6 months after Emily. Cancer that moved so fast it felt like my body was trying to catch up with my daughter. Robert and Linda waited a year before they started dating publicly, another year before they got married. Respectful, appropriate. But I know the truth. They'd been grieving together, healing together, falling in love together since the day I died, and I wanted them to. I orchestrated it. I gave them permission. I built their future because I couldn't be part of it. If this story has touched your heart so far, please leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew. These stories matter because they remind us that every family has hidden chapters. Lauren set down the letter and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to process what she'd learned. Her parents' marriage, the foundation of her entire existence, had been arranged by her father's dying first wife. Linda hadn't stolen Robert from Sarah. Sarah had given him to Linda like a gift, like a responsibility, like a mission she had to complete before she could die. But there was more to the letter. 2 more pages. Lauren picked them up, dreading what else Sarah might have written, what other truths might shatter her understanding of her own life. Now I need to tell you why I'm writing this letter to you specifically, why I'm addressing it to Lauren Elizabeth Mitchell, even though that name doesn't exist yet. Here's where it gets strange, Lauren. Here's where I sound crazy. But I'm dying, and dying people sometimes see things others can't see. Experience things that don't make rational sense, and I've seen you. Lauren's hands started shaking again. Seen her. Sarah had seen her, 4 years before she was born. That was impossible. That was... what? A dying woman's hallucination? A fever dream? But Sarah's handwriting was steady here, clear and certain. I started having dreams about 2 months before I died, dreams that felt more real than waking life. In these dreams, I was in a house. This house, I realized later, your father's house where he'd live for the rest of his life. And there was a little girl playing in the backyard. Dark hair, serious eyes, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was building something with blocks, concentrating so hard her tongue was sticking out the side of her mouth. And I knew, I don't know how, but I knew, that this was Robert and Linda's daughter, the child they'd have after I was gone. Lauren felt chills run down her arms. She had been 7 or 8 when she'd built elaborate block structures in that backyard, had spent hours creating castles and cities and entire worlds, her tongue sticking out when she concentrated. This detail was too specific to be coincidence, too precise to be lucky guessing. I had that dream maybe 20 times in my final 2 months. Sometimes you were older, 10, 12, 15. Sometimes you were doing different things, playing piano, reading in the big chair by the window, having an argument with Linda about curfew. But it was always you, always this girl who looked so much like me, it made my heart ache. And I realized, you were my second chance, Robert's second chance. The daughter he'd get to raise, to watch grow up, to love without losing her after 6 days. Lauren stood up and paced the attic, her mind racing. This was impossible. People didn't dream about children who didn't exist yet. They didn't see the future with this kind of clarity, but Sarah's letter was so specific, so detailed, and the photograph, that image of Sarah looking exactly like Lauren would look 20 years later, that was real, that was documented, that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. I know what you're thinking, that I was hallucinating, that the cancer had spread to my brain and I was seeing things that weren't real. The doctors thought that too when I tried to tell them. But Linda believed me. I told her about the dreams, described you in detail, and she promised me she'd remember. Promised that if she and Robert had a daughter who looked like my descriptions, she'd know it was real, that I'd really seen you. Lauren thought about her mother Linda, who died when Lauren was 19. She tried to remember if Linda had ever said anything strange, anything about Lauren being special, or predicted, or seen before she was born. But she couldn't remember. Linda had been a quiet woman, private with her emotions, not given to dramatic pronouncements. If she'd believed Sarah's visions, she'd kept that belief to herself. But here's the part that kept me up at night in those final weeks. In my dreams, I wasn't just watching you. Sometimes you were watching me, like you could see me seeing you, like somehow we were connected across time, across death, across the impossible divide between someone who's dying and someone who hasn't been born yet. And in one dream, the last dream I had before I died, you were older, maybe 40, and you were in an attic and you were reading a letter, this letter, and you were crying. And I wanted to reach through the dream and tell you something, tell you the truth about why I'm writing this. Lauren felt her throat tighten. She was 42 years old. She was in an attic. She was reading this letter, and she was crying. Sarah had seen this exact moment 4 decades before it happened. There was no rational explanation, no scientific principle that could account for it, but it was happening. The truth is this, Lauren. You're not just Robert and Linda's daughter. You're also, in some impossible way, Emily's replacement. The daughter they lost, reborn. I know how that sounds. I know it seems like I'm putting an unfair burden on you, but I need you to understand. You weren't an accident. You weren't a coincidence. You were hoped for, prayed for, dreamed into existence by a dying woman who wanted her husband to have the chance to be a father to a daughter who'd live. Lauren read that paragraph 3 times, trying to understand what Sarah was saying. She'd been hoped for before she existed, dreamed into being. But that was magical thinking. That was the desperate fantasy of a dying woman trying to make sense of her own approaching death, except for the photograph, except for the details Sarah knew about Lauren's childhood, except for the fact that Sarah had described this exact moment, 44 years before it would happen. I need to tell you something else, something I didn't tell Robert or Linda because I didn't want to scare them. In my dreams of you, you weren't always happy. Sometimes you were angry. Sometimes you were asking questions about your parents that they couldn't answer, or wouldn't answer, and I realized you'd find this letter someday. You'd discover the truth about how your parents got together, about Emily, about me, and you'd have questions. You'd want to know why they never told you, why they let you grow up thinking their love story was simple when it was actually built on death and grief and a dying woman's matchmaking. That's exactly what Lauren was feeling right now. Anger mixing with grief, mixing with confusion. Why hadn't they told her? Why had they let her believe a lie for 42 years? She'd grown up thinking she was the product of a normal love story. She'd never questioned it, never suspected that underneath her parents' quiet marriage was this much pain, this much history, this much weight. So here's what I need you to know. Robert and Linda loved you, will have loved you. The tenses get confusing when you're writing to the future. But whatever anger you're feeling right now, don't let it poison the memory of their love. They did their best. They carried the weight of Emily's death and my death and the strange way their relationship began, and they tried to give you a normal childhood. They tried to protect you from the pain that created you. That's not betrayal, Lauren, that's love. Lauren descended from the attic in a daze, the letter clutched in her hand, the photograph of Sarah and baby Emily tucked carefully in her jacket pocket. She needed air, needed space, needed to think about what she'd learned. She walked out to the backyard where she'd played as a child, where Sarah had dreamed of her playing decades before she was born. The block structures were gone, of course, replaced years ago by a garden Linda had planted, flowers that came back every spring without anyone tending them anymore. Lauren sat on the old wooden bench her father had built, the same bench that appeared in childhood photographs, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, hovering over Greg's name. But what would she even say? That her father had been married before? That she had a sister who died before she was born? That a dying woman had somehow seen her future and left her a letter about it? Instead, she called her father's lawyer, Martin Brewster, who'd been handling Robert's estate. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that professional sympathy that lawyers perfected for dealing with the grieving. "Lauren, how are you holding up? How's the house sorting going?" "Martin, did you know my father was married before my mother?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then, carefully, "Yes, I knew. Robert told me about Sarah when he first came to me to draft his will about 15 years ago. He wanted to make sure certain things were handled properly if he died before explaining them to you himself." "Certain things," Lauren repeated. "Like the letter in the attic? So you found it?" Martin didn't sound surprised. "He asked me to make sure you found it if he died before telling you himself. He'd been planning to tell you for years, Lauren, always saying next year or when the time is right. But I think the time never felt right because the story was so complicated. Did he tell you what's in the letter? About Sarah's dreams? About—" Lauren couldn't even articulate it. "About a dying woman seeing the future. He told me some of it. Said his first wife had visions of you before you were born. Said she'd described you in detail, your appearance, your personality, things she couldn't have known. He thought she was hallucinating at first, but then you were born, and you looked exactly like Sarah. And as you grew up, you did the things she'd described, had the mannerisms she'd predicted, and Robert started to believe that maybe Sarah had somehow actually seen you." Lauren stood up and paced the backyard, the phone pressed to her ear. "That's impossible, Martin. People don't see the future. They don't dream about children who don't exist yet with that kind of accuracy." "I know," Martin said quietly. "But I met Sarah once, did you know that? Years before she got sick, She and Robert came to my father's law office about something. I was just a kid, maybe 12, helping out after school, and Sarah looked at me and said, "You're going to be a lawyer someday. You're going to help people navigate difficult times." My father laughed it off, but she was right, and I remember thinking she had this way of looking at you like she could see through time, like she knew things she shouldn't know. Lauren felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Did my mother believe it? That Sarah could see the future? Linda never talked about it publicly, but Robert said she kept a journal. Your mother kept meticulous journals her whole adult life, and she documented everything Sarah predicted about you, every detail. He said Linda would write down what Sarah had dreamed, and then years later, when you did those exact things, Linda would go back and mark the entry as confirmed. Robert showed me one of those journals once. It was unsettling. Dozens of predictions, all of them accurate. "Where are these journals?" Lauren demanded. "Why haven't I seen them?" "They're at the house somewhere." Robert said Linda hid them, didn't want you to find them accidentally. She planned to give them to you when you were older, when you could understand. But she died before that happened, and Robert couldn't bring himself to share them after she was gone. I think he was worried you'd feel like you'd never had any free will, like your whole life had been scripted before you were born. Lauren walked back into the house and started searching systematically. If Linda had kept journals documenting Sarah's predictions, Lauren needed to see them, needed to understand the full scope of what Sarah had seen, what her mother had believed. She searched Linda's old office, now converted into Robert's study. She searched the bedroom closets. She searched the basement storage room. Nothing. Finally, at nearly midnight, exhausted and frustrated, she returned to the attic. If her father had wanted to hide something, the attic made sense. He'd kept it locked her entire childhood, had made it forbidden territory. What else might be up here besides Sarah's letter? She searched more carefully this time, opening trunks and boxes she'd dismissed earlier, and in a wooden chest tucked in the far corner, beneath old quilts and photo albums, she found them. 5 leather-bound journals, each labeled with dates. 1979 through 1986, the year Lauren was born, and then 3 more covering her childhood. Lauren sat on the attic floor and opened the first journal, her mother's handwriting, precise and clear, documenting Sarah's final months. March 15, 1979. Sarah told me today that she dreamed of Robert's future daughter again. She says the girl's name will be Lauren, says she'll be born in September, 4 years from now. Says she'll have a birthmark on her left shoulder blade in the shape of a crescent moon. She described it so specifically, the exact size, the exact placement. Robert thinks she's delirious. I'm not so sure. Lauren reached over her shoulder, touching the birthmark she'd had her entire life. Crescent-shaped, left shoulder blade, exactly where Sarah had predicted 4 years before Lauren was born. She kept reading, page after page of Sarah's visions documented by Linda. Predictions about what kind of baby Lauren would be, colicky, difficult to soothe, happiest when carried. About her childhood, she'd be afraid of dogs until age 7 when she'd meet a golden retriever that changed her mind. About her teenage years, she'd rebel at 14, dye her hair purple, regret it almost immediately. About her adult life, she'd study architecture, marry someone named Greg, struggle with infertility in her 30s. Every single prediction was accurate. Every detail matched Lauren's actual life. It was impossible. It was documented. It was real. Lauren spent the entire night in the attic reading Linda's journals, tracing the arc of Sarah's visions through her mother's meticulous documentation. The journals revealed a portrait of her mother she'd never known, Linda as a woman caught between scientific skepticism and spiritual awe, trying to make sense of a dying friend's impossible prophecies. One entry from April 1979 particularly struck Lauren. Sarah made me promise something today. She said that when Lauren is old enough, when she's ready, I should tell her about Emily, about the sister she never met, but who paved the way for her existence. Sarah believes that Lauren will need to know she wasn't a replacement for Emily, but a continuation, a second chance. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can tell a child that a dying woman dreamed her into existence, but I promised Sarah I would try. But Linda had never told her, had died when Lauren was 19, taking these secrets with her, and Robert had continued the silence for another 23 years, until death claimed him too. Lauren felt a surge of anger at both her parents. How could they keep this from her? How could they let her live 42 years without knowing the truth of her own origin story? But reading further, Lauren found entries that complicated her anger. Linda describing how torn she felt between honoring Sarah's wishes and protecting Lauren's sense of normalcy. Robert wrestling with whether knowing about Sarah's visions would make Lauren feel like she had no agency, like she was just fulfilling a script written before she was born. Both parents agonizing over the right thing to do, the right time to reveal the truth, the right words to use. December 1993, Linda had written. Lauren is 11 now. She asked me today if she looks like me. I had to say no, she doesn't. She looks exactly like Sarah. Sometimes when I watch her playing piano or reading by the window or concentrating on her homework with that serious expression, I see Sarah so clearly it takes my breath away. It's like Sarah sent us a piece of herself, her face, her mannerisms, her spirit. I love Lauren with everything I am, but sometimes I wonder if I'm raising my daughter or Sarah's daughter or some impossible combination of both. Lauren felt tears streaming down her face. Her mother had carried this weight alone, raising a daughter who looked like her husband's dead first wife. Watching that daughter fulfill prophecies made by a dying woman, trying to love Lauren for who she was while being haunted by who she resembled. But there was more. In a journal from 2001, the year Linda died, Lauren found an entry that made her blood run cold. I'm sick. The doctors say it's breast cancer, stage 3, aggressive. The irony isn't lost on me. Sarah died of breast cancer too. Same age, same diagnosis, same grim prognosis. I keep thinking about Sarah's visions. She predicted so much about Lauren. Did she predict this too? Did she see me dying and leaving Lauren the way she left Robert? I've searched her predictions, read and reread every vision she described, and I found one I'd forgotten about. From March 1979. Sarah said, Linda will raise Lauren until she's grown, until Lauren doesn't need a mother anymore, and then Linda will come home to us. I thought it was poetic language, a dying woman's way of saying we'd all be together in heaven someday. But now I wonder if Sarah knew. If she saw me dying at 45, saw Lauren at 19 losing her mother the same way Robert lost his first wife. Lauren set down the journal, her hands shaking. Sarah had predicted her mother's death, had known that Linda would only get to raise Lauren until she was 19, had seen it all. The breast cancer, the age, the timing, and Linda had realized it too, had spent her final months understanding that even her death had been scripted by Sarah's visions decades earlier. The final entry in Linda's last journal was dated 2 weeks before she died. I need to leave Lauren the journals, she needs to know the truth, but I'm too weak to explain it properly. I'm going to hide them where she'll find them someday. In the attic, with Sarah's letter. When she's ready, really ready, she'll find them both. She'll understand that her life wasn't determined by Sarah's visions. The visions didn't create her reality. They just saw it, described it, like looking through a window at something that already existed in the future. Lauren has free will. She's made her own choices. She's lived her own life. Sarah just had the gift or curse of seeing how it would unfold. And now I'm part of that unfolding, part of the story Sarah saw. And I'm at peace with it. Because being Lauren's mother for 19 years was the greatest gift of my life, even if Sarah knew it would end this way, even if this ending was written before Lauren was even born. Lauren closed the journal and sat in the silence of the attic as dawnlight began to filter through the small window. Her mother had known she was dying young, had understood it was part of Sarah's vision, had made peace with it, and she'd used her final months to document everything, the prophecies, the reality, the impossible accuracy of a dying woman's dreams. But there was one more thing Lauren needed to find. Sarah's letter had mentioned that she'd told Robert something in her final days. Something about Lauren. Something important enough that Robert had carried it for 44 years, but never shared. Lauren needed to know what it was. She returned to the box labeled 1978 and searched more carefully. And there, tucked inside a book, a copy of The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, was another envelope. This one addressed simply Robert in Sarah's handwriting. Lauren held it up to the light, debating whether to open it. This letter wasn't meant for her, but her father was dead, and whatever truth this envelope contained, Lauren needed to know it. She opened it carefully and found a single page. Sarah's handwriting, but shakier than in the letter to Lauren, written closer to her death perhaps, in her final days or hours. My dearest Robert, by the time you read this, I'll be gone and you'll be beginning your life with Linda. I hope you'll be happy. I pray you'll find peace. But there's something I need to tell you that I couldn't say while I was alive. Something about Lauren, your daughter who doesn't exist yet, but who I've seen so clearly in my dreams. She's special, Robert. Not in a mystical way. Not because she's prophesied or predicted or seen before she's born. She's special because she's yours. Your second chance at being a father. Your opportunity to do all the things you didn't get to do with Emily. Watch her grow up. Walk her down the aisle. Meet her children. All the moments we lost. Lauren will give you those moments. And when she finds this letter, because she will find it, I've seen that too, I need her to know something. She wasn't a replacement for Emily. She wasn't a reincarnation or a do-over or a second attempt. She's her own person, her own soul, her own beautiful, complicated, individual self. The visions I had weren't blueprints. They were glimpses, like looking through a window at someone's life. I saw her, but I didn't create her. She created herself through millions of tiny choices and moments and decisions. Don't let her think she's trapped by prophecy. She's free. She's always been free. The future I saw was the future she chose. That's the miracle, Robert. Not that I could see the future, but that the future I saw was so beautiful. That the daughter you and Linda would have was exactly the daughter you deserved. I love you. I loved Emily. I'll love Lauren from whatever place I'm going to. Take care of them both, Linda and Lauren. The family I'm giving you. The family I dreamed into being. The family that will carry us all forward. Lauren read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Sarah had known, had understood that Lauren would find these letters, would read these journals, would be faced with the impossible reality of her own predicted existence. And Sarah had tried from beyond death to give Lauren the one thing she'd need, permission to be herself, freedom from the weight of prophecy. Lauren spent the next few days in a fog, moving through her father's house like a ghost, reading and rereading the letters and journals, trying to make peace with what she'd learned. She called Greg finally, told him everything, and he drove up from Boston immediately. He found her sitting in the backyard, surrounded by photographs, images of Sarah, of Emily, of her parents' wedding, of Lauren herself at various ages. "This is insane," Greg said, sitting down beside her. "You know that, right? This is the most insane thing I've ever heard." "I know." Lauren handed him Linda's journals. "But it's all documented. Every prediction, every vision, all of it came true." Greg read in silence for a long time. Finally, he looked up, his face pale. "The infertility thing. Sarah predicted you'd struggle with infertility in your 30s. We struggled with infertility in my 30s, Lauren confirmed. They'd tried for 3 years before giving up, before deciding to be child-free. It had been painful, but they'd made peace with it. Now Lauren wondered if that too had been scripted, seen by Sarah 4 decades before it happened. "But we had a choice," Greg said, reading her thoughts. "We chose to stop trying. We chose to build our life without kids. Sarah didn't force that. She just saw it." "Did she?" Lauren asked. "Or did knowing about the prediction somehow make it happen? If my parents had told me about Sarah's visions, would I have unconsciously fulfilled them? Did I make my own choices, or did I follow a script written before I was born?" "That's the wrong question," Greg said firmly. "The right question is, does it matter? You're 42 years old. You've lived your life, made your choices. Whether Sarah saw them coming or not doesn't change the fact that you made them. You're not a character in someone else's story, Lauren. You're the author of your own life who happened to have a very prescient reader." Lauren wanted to believe him, but she kept thinking about one particular entry in Linda's journal, one prediction Sarah had made that hadn't come true yet. Or had it? "There's more," Lauren said, pulling out a photocopy she'd made of a specific page. "Look at this, from Sarah's final week, March 1979. I dreamed of Lauren's daughter tonight." Yes, daughter, singular. Lauren will have one child late in life unexpectedly, a girl with Sarah's eyes and Lauren's spirit. She'll come when Lauren has given up hope. She'll be the surprise that makes everything make sense. "Greg, I'm 42. We stopped trying for kids 5 years ago. We accepted being child-free. But Sarah saw a daughter. My daughter. Our daughter." Greg stared at the page. "Lauren, you can't plan your life based on a dead woman's visions. What if this is the one prediction that doesn't come true? What if it does?" Lauren interrupted. "What if Sarah was right about this too? What if we're supposed to have a daughter and we've given up too soon? They talked for hours, debating and arguing, and eventually sitting in silence as the sun set over the Vermont mountains. Finally, Greg said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to try again," Lauren admitted. "I know it's crazy. I know we decided we were done." But Greg, Sarah saw everything else correctly. Every detail, every moment. What if she was right about this too? What if our daughter is out there somewhere waiting to exist, and we just need to be brave enough to try one more time? They started trying again. Not desperately, not obsessively, but with a strange sense of faith Lauren had never felt before. Faith in Sarah's vision, faith in the future that had been glimpsed 4 decades ago. And 3 months later, Lauren took a pregnancy test that came back positive. She was 42 years old and pregnant, the same age Linda had been when she died. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. She spent the pregnancy alternating between joy and terror, reading and rereading Sarah's journals, looking for any other predictions about this child. But there was only that one mention, a daughter late in life, unexpected, with Sarah's eyes. Lauren's daughter was born in June, 8 months after Lauren had found the letters in the attic. They named her Emily Sarah Mitchell Harrison, after both the sister Lauren had never met and the woman who'd somehow seen her entire life before she'd lived it. And when the nurse placed Emily in Lauren's arms for the first time, Lauren looked into her daughter's face and saw eyes that were neither blue like Greg's nor brown like her own, but hazel with green flecks, exactly like the eyes in the photographs of Sarah she'd found in the attic. "She has Sarah's eyes," Lauren whispered. "Just like the prediction said," Greg confirmed, his voice full of wonder. But there was something else, something Sarah's vision hadn't included. When Emily was 3 days old, the nurses came to take her for routine tests. And they found something, a heart murmur, irregular rhythm. They rushed her to pediatric cardiology, did an echocardiogram, found a small hole in her heart, a patent ductus arteriosus, the same defect that had killed Emily Sr. 46 years earlier. Lauren felt her world collapse. This was it, the terrible symmetry, history repeating. Sarah had seen a daughter with her eyes, but she hadn't seen or hadn't told them about the heart defect, about history coming full circle, about Lauren potentially losing her daughter the same way Robert had lost his first daughter. But medicine had advanced in 46 years. The hole was small, treatable. The cardiologist performed a catheterization procedure when Emily was 2 weeks old, closing the hole with a small device threaded through her blood vessels. A procedure that hadn't existed in 1978. A procedure that saved Emily's life. Lauren held her daughter in the hospital room, where Linda had once held the first Emily, where Sarah had watched her baby die, where 3 generations of women had intersected in grief and hope and impossible prophecy. And she understood something she'd been struggling with since finding the letters. Sarah's visions hadn't been about controlling the future. They'd been about giving Robert and Linda hope during the darkest time of their lives, hope that there would be another daughter, another chance, another Emily who would live. Sarah had seen Lauren's daughter, had seen her surviving despite the heart defect, because Sarah had seen her as a living, thriving child, which meant the medical intervention would work. The prophecy itself was reassurance, proof that Emily would survive because Sarah had seen her future, and that future existed. Lauren returned to Vermont 6 months after Emily's birth, bringing Greg and the baby with her. They decided to keep her father's house instead of selling it, turning it into a summer retreat where Emily could grow up knowing her grandfather's legacy, walking the same floors Lauren had walked as a child. They created a memorial in the house, not morbid or shrine-like, but beautiful. In the living room, Lauren hung photographs of both Emilys side by side. The first Emily in her pink blanket, 6 days old. The second Emily at 6 months old, healthy and thriving. And between them, photographs of Sarah and Linda and Robert, the 3 people whose intertwined lives had made Lauren's existence possible. Lauren wrote everything down, the letters, the visions, the journals, the impossible prophecies that had all come true. She compiled it into a book, not for publication, but for Emily, for her daughter to read someday when she was old enough to understand that her family history was stranger and more beautiful than most, that she'd been seen before she was born, predicted by a woman who died decades before her existence, saved by medical advances that hadn't existed when her namesake had died. And Lauren wrote a letter of her own, to be sealed and given to Emily when she was 42 years old. Lauren's age when she'd found Sarah's letter in the attic. The same age Linda had been when she'd died. The same age that seemed to be significant across 3 generations of their family. "Dear Emily," Lauren wrote, "by the time you read this, I'll either be very old or dead, depending on whether I inherited your grandmother Linda's fate or managed to escape it. But either way, I need you to know something about your name, your history, and the impossible chain of events that led to your existence." She told Emily everything. About Sarah's visions, about the first Emily who'd lived 6 days, about Linda documenting decades of prophecies that all came true, about finding the letters in the attic and learning that her entire life had been glimpsed by a dying woman in 1979. "You might wonder if you have free will," Lauren wrote, "if your life is predetermined, scripted, seen before it's lived. I've struggled with that question since finding Sarah's letters, but here's what I've come to believe. Sarah didn't create our futures. She glimpsed them, like looking through a window at something that already existed but hadn't happened yet. We still made every choice. We still lived our lives. She just had the gift, or curse, of seeing how it would unfold. And she used that gift to give your great-grandfather hope during the darkest time of his life, to tell him he'd get another daughter, another chance, another Emily who would live. That hope kept him going, kept him and Linda together, made our family possible. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever wondered about fate and choice and the mysteries of families, please leave a like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments about your own experiences with impossible coincidences or family prophecies. These stories connect us all. Lauren sealed the letter and put it in a fireproof safe along with Sarah's original letter, Linda's journals and all the photographs. Instructions in her will that the safe should be given to Emily on her 42nd birthday. Another generation, another revelation, another chance to understand the impossible chain of love and loss and prophecy that had created their family. But she didn't stop there. Lauren reached out to medical researchers studying near-death experiences and deathbed visions. She shared Sarah's story anonymously, provided copies of Linda's journals documenting the predictions, offered to participate in studies about precognition and prophetic dreams. Scientists were fascinated. Some proposed explanations: unconscious pattern recognition, confirmation bias, the power of suggestion. Others admitted they had no explanation. That Sarah's visions were too specific, too accurate, too impossible to dismiss as coincidence or wishful thinking. Lauren didn't need scientific validation. She'd lived the proof. She was the proof. A woman dreamed into existence by a dying stranger, predicted in detail 4 years before she was born, living a life that had been glimpsed but never controlled by visions from 1979. She took Emily to visit the hospital where both Emilys had been born, 46 years apart. The building had been renovated, modernized, but the basic structure was the same. Lauren stood in what had been the NICU in 1978, where Linda had worked as a nurse, where Sarah had watched her first daughter die, where the chain of events that would lead to Lauren's existence had begun. "Your great-grandmother Sarah died here," Lauren told 6-month-old Emily, who was too young to understand but seemed to listen intently anyway. "She died, but before she died, she saw you. Saw me, saw all of us, and she left us a gift. Not the visions themselves, those were just Sarah's way of seeing. The gift was hope. Hope that life continues, that love persists, that even when everything seems lost, there are second chances waiting in the future. They made it a tradition, visiting Vermont every summer, walking through Robert's house where Sarah had dreamed of Lauren, where Linda had documented those dreams, where Robert had kept the secret for 44 years until death finally revealed it. Emily grew up knowing her family's strange history, understanding that she was named after 2 people, one who'd died 46 years before she was born, another who'd seen her existence before it happened. When Emily was 5 years old, she said something that made Lauren's breath catch. They were in the backyard, Emily playing with blocks in the exact spot where Lauren had played at the same age, and Emily looked up and said, "Mommy, sometimes I dream about a lady with sad eyes. She tells me she's glad I'm here. She says she's been waiting to meet me." Lauren felt chills run down her spine. "What does the lady look like, sweetheart?" "She looks like you," Emily said simply, "but older. From the old days. She wears a nurse dress." Lauren showed Emily the photographs later. showed her pictures of Sarah, and Emily pointed immediately. "That's her. That's the lady from my dreams." Greg thought it was coincidence. Children had vivid imaginations. They saw photographs and incorporated them into dreams. It didn't mean anything, but Lauren knew better. Sarah's gift, whatever it was, had been passed down, skipped a generation maybe, or manifested differently. But Emily was seeing things too, connecting with the past in ways that shouldn't be possible but were. Lauren documented everything, started her own journal, following in Linda's footsteps, recording Emily's dreams and visions, and the strange ways their family seemed to exist outside normal time. She wrote about the day Emily, at age 7, described in perfect detail a woman she'd never met, her grandmother Linda, who died 3 years before Emily was born. Wrote about Emily knowing things she shouldn't know, seeing people who were gone, having that same quality Sarah had, like she could see through the veils that separated past, present, and future. On Lauren's 50th birthday, she and Greg sat in the Vermont house's living room, surrounded by family photographs spanning 3 generations. Emily was 8 years old, healthy and thriving, showing no signs of the heart defect that had almost killed her as a newborn. The medical device that had saved her life was still there, a small piece of metal and fabric holding together the hole that would have been fatal 46 years earlier. "Do you ever regret finding the letters?" Greg asked. "Do you wish you could have just lived your life not knowing about Sarah's visions?" Lauren considered the question. "No," she said finally. "Finding those letters was the most important thing that ever happened to me. They showed me that my life, our life, has meaning beyond just the day-to-day, that we're part of something larger, a story that started before we were born and will continue after we're gone. Sarah saw me, loved me before I existed, gave my father hope when he'd lost everything. How could I regret knowing that? Even though it means Emily might have inherited the gift." Greg gestured toward their daughter, who was drawing in her sketchbook, oblivious to the conversation. "Even though she might spend her life seeing things that haven't happened yet? Especially because of that," Lauren said. "Sarah's visions weren't a curse. They were love made visible, care extended across time. Emily having that same gift means the chain continues. The love continues. We take care of each other across generations, across death, across the impossible divide between past and future." They decided to write it all down, not just for Emily, but for whoever came after. For Emily's children, if she had them. For researchers studying consciousness and time and the mysteries of human connection. For anyone who'd ever wondered if love could transcend death, if the future could speak to the past, if impossible things were possible after all. Lauren titled the manuscript, "Letters Across Time, a Family Story of Love, Loss, and Prophecy." She included everything. The original letters, excerpts from Linda's journals, documentation of every prediction that had come true, Emily's own emerging visions. And she included her own thoughts on what it all meant, this strange legacy they'd inherited. "I used to think free will and fate were opposites," she wrote in the conclusion, "that either we chose our path or it was chosen for us. But Sarah's visions taught me something different. They showed me that the future exists, not as a fixed point, but as a destination we're moving toward through millions of tiny choices. Sarah could see where we were going, but she didn't put us on that path. We walked it ourselves. Her visions were like a map of terrain that already existed. She could describe the mountains we'd climb, the valleys we'd cross, the rivers we'd ford, but we still had to do the climbing, the crossing, the fording. She saw our journey. We lived it. And both things are true. Both things matter. We are both free and fated, both choosing and chosen, both writing our story and living a story that's already been written." On the day Lauren finished the manuscript, she sealed a copy in the fireproof safe with the other letters, to be opened by Emily at 42, and she kept a copy for herself, reading it sometimes when she needed to remember that her life, impossible and prophesied and real, had always been worth living. That being seen by Sarah hadn't diminished her. It had confirmed her, had proved that she mattered enough to be glimpsed across time by a dying woman who'd loved her before she existed. 20 years later, when Lauren was 70 and Emily was 32, they returned to Vermont one more time. Emily brought her own daughter, Lauren's granddaughter, named Sarah after the great-great-grandmother who'd started it all. Little Sarah was 5 years old, dark-haired and serious, with hazel eyes that seemed to see more than they should. They sat together on the back porch, 3 generations of women, and Lauren told the whole story one more time. About the letters in the attic, about the visions that came true, about love reaching across decades to touch people who hadn't been born yet. And little Sarah listened with that intense concentration Lauren recognized from her own childhood, from the descriptions Linda had written in her journals, from the photographs of Sarah the first, looking at the camera like she could see through time. "Great-grandma," little Sarah said when the story was done, "I dream about people too, people from before I was born. Is that okay?" Lauren pulled her granddaughter close. "More than okay, sweetheart. That's a gift, a way of seeing. Use it well. Use it to love people across time, the way your great-great-grandmother Sarah loved me before I existed. That's what our family does. We love each other across impossible distances. We see each other across death. We leave letters and journals and stories so that no one is ever really gone. We're all connected, past, present, future, in one continuous chain of love." And as the sun set over the Vermont mountains, painting the sky in shades Sarah had painted 46 years ago, Lauren thought about the letter in the attic that had changed everything. The impossible artifact addressed to someone who didn't exist yet. The proof that love could see across time. The gift that kept giving generation after generation, showing them all that they were part of something larger than themselves, something beautiful, something eternal, something true.